Hi, I'm Roxanne Richardson, and this is the Casual Friday podcast. In this week's podcast, I have new things I've learned, I've got new gifts I've received, and I'll update you on my Finish It February 2024 results. So let's get started. I recently went to an all-day event at a local fabric shop called Treadle Yard Goods in St. Paul. It's where I've always gone to get buttons for my sweater projects. The buttons I'm wearing here are vintage 1960s buttons that I was delighted to get because this is a 1960s pattern knit with 1960s yarn. So that was really cool. So I was taking this class, and the shop owner mentioned that there was going to be an all-day event earlier in February. It was a couple of weeks ago, and there were going to be some really interesting speakers. And one of the people who was going to be doing a presentation was taking the sewing class as well. She's a weaver, and she teaches classes on different types of thread buttons. And that is something that I've been interested in. I talked about it, I think, back in January, that it's something that I really wanted to learn to do at some point this year. And so I jumped at the opportunity to learn how to make these death head buttons is what it was. I didn't know anything about who else was going to be speaking. And I was just really excited about the button class part of it. It turned out there's a man who is the head of the costume department at one of the local universities. He's also worked at the Guthrie Theater in their costume department. He's worked in New York. He's worked in London. He's worked, in various different places for many, many years, decades. And he gave a presentation on creating costumes for theater that was just absolutely fascinating. And so much of what he does is historical costuming, and the research that he does is really fascinating. Then we had the death head button class, and I will go to the overhead in just a little bit and show you the button that I made. And then there was a woman who worked at the shop, but she does historical dress. She goes to different Victorian events and stuff, and she has dresses that she has made from different time periods. And so she dressed herself from the underwear up and telling us the different parts about how they were made, what different things about the construction. It was really interesting. Then they did a segment. She and the owner did just 15 minutes of their top tips and tricks. And some of the things that they were talking about pertain to the goodie bag we got. It was like a really nice goodie bag. It included, a pin cushion, and I thought, oh, I already have a pin cushion. It turns out you can't have too many pin cushions, because I was sitting at my desk pinning my skirt that I was working on, but then I'd go to the sewing machine and my pin cushion would be over my desk, and so then I had another pin cushion. So that's been really handy. They gave us a pressing cloth. And I already had a pressing cloth, but mine was kind of so huge that it becomes unwieldy, and this is actually very nice. And I learned to use a pressing cloth during the course of the class that I've been taking for the past month or so. So that was very nice. And then they gave us this. And this is something that I also had learned to use when I was pressing in my classes. And it is just really nice. And they were telling us that sometimes you can just get this base part, and anytime that they can get this part with the handle on top of it, they like to get some of them in, because they just are harder to get for some reason. And they kind of glossed over what the purpose of it was. And I felt like I was the only person who didn't know what it was. And I'm too old to be embarrassed by what I don't know. So I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I don't understand what this is for. It's like for shirt collars or something. So they explained how you can get putting the collar that's maybe sewn on 3 sides, and you could put it in there and get the point in there. I was like, oh, okay. And then half the people there were like, oh, that's what it's for. So I wasn't the only one who didn't know what it was for. So we got some really great stuff. And then the final presenter was a woman who has been a professional dance instructor and professional ballroom dancer. She does Latin dancing and tango. I think there's a couple of kinds that she did. And she brought some of her costumes. She didn't have all of her costumes because they're so expensive that typically you end up selling them to somebody else. And she just showed them to us. And I've always wondered about these ballroom dancing costumes because they look like there's nothing there. And you think, how can they be doing all of these movements and they're in high heels and there's not a wardrobe malfunction? And it's because there's a lot of structure inside of those things. There's no way those things are going to fall apart. So that was really amazing. She passed them around. We got to see them and look inside them. So it was really a fun day. And I got a lot of it out of it. But I want to show you the death head buttons or button that I made because that was absolutely a skill that I wanted to learn. So let's go to the overhead. We got a few things in the class. We got a few different button forms for making different types of buttons. Like this is the style that you would use to make what's called a Dorset button, where there are spokes going across. And we could make smaller death head buttons. This is just like a rubber washer, and this is an actual button form that has some raised surface on it. She just gave us this larger one as well as just a flat wooden disc with a hole in the middle. And then she also gave us a few other tools to help us make these buttons. And she made these little beeswax bears as well. This was used on the back side of the wooden disc and along the edges so that when we were wrapping the thread, it would help it stick and stay in place. This was really great. She gave us a nice handout so we could do other kinds of buttons as well. This is a larger button and we were using some kind of weaving yarn. I can't remember what it is. It's a little on the thicker side because it's a bigger button, and I felt like I was pulling as tight as I could, but my table mate, who is the costume historian, like I makes historical costumes for theater, he was really pulling his thread tight, so he got something that was much tighter, and I just didn't feel like my hands could do that. So I would want to maybe try some with a thinner thread with a smaller form to see if I could actually get good at it, because it wasn't really that hard. I think I did an okay job. It's not perfect. I'm not going to use this on a garment. This is how, it's this practice. This is learning how to do it. I would potentially like to make some death head buttons for either a sweater or maybe something that I'm sewing later this year. I don't know. I don't have a specific plan, but maybe for my hand spun sweater, I might like to make, if it ends up being a cardigan, I might want to make some death head buttons. I wouldn't use the yarn that I spun with. It's a woolen spun yarn, and you really have to pull this tightly, and I just wouldn't want to do that for that particular yarn. So, but it was really fun. It's something I've wanted to do. I was so happy that it was actually easier than I expected, and it was a lot of fun. Every month, the first Saturday of the month, our Knitters Guild has what's called Sip and Knit. It's at a local brewery. It's just get together, social knitting. And one of the people who goes there is a guy named Steve, who I'd met last summer when he stopped by the Minnesota Knitters Guild booth at the state fair. And he wanted to thank me for my videos. He was a relatively new knitter, and he had entered a hat and he'd gotten third place, and he's said my videos really helped him in his knitting journey, and I was so thrilled to see him and meet him. Well, he was at Sip and Knit, and I think it was he's there a lot, but I think it was in beginning of February, not beginning of January. He stopped by the table that I was sitting at, and he gave me a gift. And it was this. It's a he's got a 3D printer, so he's experimenting with 3D printing, and it basically looks like the top of a balloon, but on the bottom it says 22-inch diameter. And so the idea is that you could block a hat on it, or you could use it to take, you know, photographs of a hat. If I want to take a photograph of this hat, I could hide the hat form underneath it, and you could just really see the hat from all angles. So this is a really nice option because I'll show you the thing I normally use. Normally I use one of two different things. I have this wig form right here. So this is smaller than I've had because it's meant to have a wig on it. So I think this is 20 inches in circumference. So sometimes I'll use this just to block a hat so that it's not stretching the hat out. But if I want to take pictures of the hat, I want something that actually fills the hat out like a human head. And so I have another sort of mannequin head that I got at this local store here in the Twin Cities. I think they have a couple of different locations. It's called Axeman, and it's like a surplus store. You never know what you're going to get. It's all kinds of weird things. And so this is, and one time we were walking by, and in the window there was a big pile of these heads. And it was right when I was telling my husband I really want to get a head that's, you know, the right size. So I have this. It's from a Chinese factory of some sort. So he's got an Asian face, and there were some female heads too that were a little bit smaller, but this one was perfect because it was exactly the right size. So this is what I use, but sometimes it just looks a little weird, like in a thumbnail or in a photograph, if I have just this disembodied head staring out into the void. So this I really appreciate that Steve gave me, because it's the perfect size, and it allows me to do photographing of the hat and not distract you with a face instead. So thank you, Steve. I really appreciate this. This video is being published on March 1st. So yesterday, February 29th, was the last day of Finish It February. I had to record this video earlier in the week before Finish It February was over. So I am going to upload a special video next Friday. It'll be a special Casual Friday because I normally am doing Casual Fridays every other week. And that one will be the montage video that I do every year, celebrating what all of my viewers have finished in Finish It February. So some of you have been treating this as a knit along in my Ravelry group, and there's been a nice chat thread where you can tell people your progress and what you're doing. But then there's also a thread where people can just post the photographs of their finished items, and it's those photographs that I use for the montage. And it usually takes a while to put together. Our guild is doing a retreat this weekend, the first retreat since 2019. So I will not be here to edit that video and get everything that was finished up to and including February 29th into the video. So that will be a special Casual Friday that will be next weekend. So what I'm going to talk about instead is my Finish It February goals and accomplishments. So I had 3 goals this Finish It February. One was to fix a sweater that I had knit back in the late 80s and had a hole in it, and it had been worn by my niece and nephew when they were little, and his kids have worn it, and now her kids are ready, but there was a hole in it, and I wanted to figure out a good way to repair it. And I was able to do that, and that I showed you that process in the previous Casual Friday, which I'll link to above if you missed it. It was a pretty slick way of fixing it. Unfortunately, the method that I use to fix it only works with intarsia. It doesn't work if you have a solid color stockinette and with a hole in the center of that. You have to do something like patching it or darning it in some other way. And so I did do a Technique Tuesday video on that last week. So if you're interested in repairing holes in your knitted garments, you might like to look at those 2 videos to kind of get some ideas. The processes have similarities to them, but they are not exactly the same. So that was the first one. The second one was to finish spinning the yarn for my hand spun sweater project. I have never knit a sweater from hand spun, and so I started it last summer. I was keeping up with it in the fall and then kind of fell off the wagon, and finish it February is the perfect time for me to restart something that I have kind of let go to the wayside. So let's go to the overhead, and I will show you what I have done with my spinning project, and then what's going to be next for that as well. So I have finished spinning all of the singles for my hand spun sweater. So I have 2 skeins of yarn that I actually finished last summer, and it was this yarn that I was so pleased with that I decided to buy more of the fiber in order to spin sweater's quantity. So I have 1 braid remaining. This is like a spare. I needed a couple of more braids, and the shepherd had 3 left, and so I just bought all 3. I only needed 2. So I have this spare one. If some disaster happens and I need to spin some more, then I have some available, but I really don't think I need it for this particular sweater. So I have all of these bobbins of singles, and now I need to ply these together to make more finished yarn like this. I was thinking about dyeing some yarn, and I was asking what suggestions people would have that would go with this. It would be a dark enough contrast to work with it. I don't think I was clear that what I was saying was I would be dyeing some of the gray yarn to work as a contrast with just the gray. So anything that this gets dyed is going to end up being darker. So I just wasn't sure what it was going to look like. And I have a terrible color memory, and I did an experiment a couple of years ago with some dyeing. I had spun some cream color BFL, which is blue faced Leicester, but I also had some fiber that was blue faced Leicester that was in natural color. So it was like mostly cream, and then there were streaks of kind of this brownish gray color in it. And so then when I spun it and applied it together, I got something that was like this. So I thought it'll be interesting to see how this dyes up, and I will use a skein, a little tiny skein of cream colored BFL, and then a little skein of this BFL, and put them in the same dye pot and see what happens. This was like the blue color, and then this is what happened when this color was put into the blue pot. So it gives it a darker color. This is actually not a bad blue. I kind of like this blue. The purple is like a really purple, and then this darker purple was the result. The pink was like practically fluorescent. And then this is the pink when it was dyed over the natural color. Because I have a terrible color memory, I didn't really remember how dark or light this was. And when I took this out, these are not the same color. This is kind of a more tan color, but they have basically the same color value. There's probably a little bit more just lighter cream in here. But I think that the results would be similar in terms of how the dye takes up. So I'm going to do an experiment. I think I would like some kind of a teal color or some kind of a purple, maybe a purple color. But I'm thinking of a teal color. I didn't dye anything in my experiment with teal. But I think I'm going to do that with some of this gray, and then knit up some swatches and see how they turn out. I am happy that I got the actual spinning done of the singles. Again, I have to do the plying, but at least I got the spinning done, which lets me take the next step towards knitting this sweater from my hand spun. The final thing that I wanted to do for Finish It February was to sew a wool skirt using some vintage hand-woven fabric that was part of a vintage sweater kit I'd bought off eBay. So this was part of my long-term project to knit a sweater from the 1890s to the 1990s. I had done all of the sweaters, but I really wanted to make the skirt. But I had some fears behind it. I'm not afraid of buying fabric, buying a pattern, following the instructions, sewing it, putting it all together. That is not an issue. The issue was I had never worked with wool fabric, so I didn't really know how that was going to work out. And it was kind of loosely woven, like it was kind of shredding a bit at the cut edges. And so I was afraid of what would happen when I actually cut it. Would it start coming apart? I wanted to kind of know how to finish the seams or finish the edges for that. The other challenge was there was very narrow fabric. It was like 26 inches wide, maybe it was 28, but it was pretty narrow. It was plaid, and I wanted to learn how to pattern match at the seams. I had never done that before, and I didn't know how to do it. So the thing is, if I make a mistake with fabric that I bought at Joann Fabrics, and I screw something up and it's not fixable, I could always go back to Joann and get more fabric. There was no more fabric to get with this. This is also was hand woven. I just didn't want to mess it up. So I'm comfortable sewing and following directions, but I wanted to learn some new skills. And because it was such a narrow skirt, I bought myself a sewing machine for my 60th birthday to replace the sewing machine I'd gotten. It was a completely mechanical one that I got when I was in college, and it was okay, but there were some things about it that I really wished were different, or features that I really wished I had. So I had a new sewing machine. And I started watching classes on Craftsy. I found someone on YouTube who, her name's Alexandra Morgan. Her company is called In-House Pattern Design, I think is what it's called. So I was learning some new skills just about sewing, but also how to draft my own skirt pattern. So doing a skirt pattern block, which meant that there really weren't instructions for sewing it. She had instructions for, the general, order of construction, but it was like, here's how you measure it, here's how you draw it out. You're going to have a seam allowance that you have to add when you're cutting. So you have to cut wider than what your pattern piece is. So I'd learned all that, and I'd made what's called a muslin using muslin fabric, a mock-up. And I'd done that from a class I'd taken on Craftsy, and then I found Alexandra Morgan, and she just had more refined techniques. So I went through her class, and I drafted the skirt pattern, and I cut out the muslin, and I sewed it up, and got all the little refinements. I have that muslin is right here. And I didn't, I didn't install the zipper. It was more an exercise in different kinds of darts and just a different approach to the measurements and all of that kind of thing. She also does a thing where she has you draw these horizontal lines across it so that when you try your muslin on, you can see if your body is causing that line to raise up or raise down, so you can figure out how to adjust it. So I was still concerned about pattern matching. And so I went to a store in St. Paul where I usually get the vintage buttons that I buy for my various cardigan projects. And I was talking to them about this fear I had with the pattern matching, and they suggested I get some plaid flannel and do that for a mock-up. And so I'm like, okay, so this is what I remember about what happened 2 years ago when I drafted the skirt block, made the muslin, and then bought the flannel fabric. My memory, after putting that to the side for 2 years, my memory was that what was holding me off was just the pattern matching, and there's a few things like some of these darts in the front, they were so tiny that I thought, I don't know if that's going to work in wool that's thicker, and I'm not sure how to adjust there's just things that I wasn't sure of. So I was at Treadle Yard Goods again, and the owner was talking to me, and as I was looking for lining fabric, I was thinking about the skirt project again, and I thought it should be lined in some way, and I wasn't really sure how I was going to do that. So she was pointing me to some lining fabric, and then she suggested that I might want to take a sewing class, that they have these, it's called Continuing On, I think it's what they call it. And it's like 5 weeks. You bring your own project and you work on it there, and you get help when you need it, and problem solving and technique help and all that kind of little hand holding if you need it. And I thought, well, that sounds great. It started at the end of January and be perfect for finish at February. On the very first day of the class, I brought the muslin, and what I said to her was, I think it's going to be too big because I've lost weight in the past year. So about a year ago, I was having some health issues with my heart and stuff, and it took me a while to kind of get that sorted out and figure out a new dietary pattern and exercise and all that. So I feel much better. I'm doing better, and it just, as a side effect of all that, I lost weight. And it went down a whole size. So I bought new jeans this fall for the first time in years because my other ones were falling off me, and they were falling down so much they were pulling my underwear down. And I was constantly pulling them up. So I knew that I was thinner, and I said, well, so this muslin's going to be probably too big for me, and I'm going to need to adjust my pattern block. And so she has me try it on, and she pins up the back so that we would know where the zipper was going to be. She's like, no, I think it fits you perfectly. And I could see that it did. And I thought, that is so weird. I know I lost weight, but maybe, I just second guessing myself about what I was like 2 years ago, and it didn't make any sense. But I was like, well, that's lucky then that I can just use the drafted pattern. And so we were laying the fabric out so that she could show me how to do pattern matching. And so, I have these pattern pieces right here. And she said, well, what's your seam allowance? And I said, oh, I wrote on there that it's 1/2 inch. And she said, is it included on your pattern piece? And I said, oh, I don't remember. And I had kind of the printout instructions from the class. And I was like, oh, no, you're supposed to add it when you cut it out. And she's like, okay. So then she gave me some adding machine tape, which is, maybe this wide. And she's like, tape that around and add, 5/8 of an inch to the back instead of the 1/2 inch that I was told for the class, this pattern drafting class. Do 5/8 and then do 7/8 where the zipper is going to be, and then you'll be able to just see where to stop sewing up the back because the zipper is going to be there. And then give yourself 1 inch on the sides. So just give yourself a nice generous seam allowance on the side, and then add 5/8 to the top at the waist. And so I spent that whole first class doing all of that, and then she showed me how to do the pattern matching, which I thought, oh, this is so much easier than I thought, once I understood what was going on. And then we discussed how I was going to line it, and we decided to do something called flat lining, where you just sew the lining piece to the fabric. And I know some of you experienced sewers find that really puzzling. You're like, I would never do it that way. And that's probably true because you have more experience. And I was picking and choosing what it was I wanted to learn. And so the teacher was offering me suggestions. Well, you could do this, or you could do this. This is the fancier way, or this is the easier way. And so sometimes I would choose the nicer way, and sometimes I would choose the easier way. Because my goals were to end up with a skirt that fit with this fabric and have pattern matching, and just go through that whole process. I got the linings done, and I got the zipper installed, and I seamed up the back, and the pattern matching was just so happy with that. And so I took my pieces home, and I decided, well, I'm actually going to sew at home and do the side seams and be ready for the next class, because what I had been doing is just working on this in the 3 hours of the class once a week. So I sewed up the side seams, gave myself that 1 inch on each side, and then I went and I tried it on, and I'm like, this is enormous. And then it all came back to me of what went on 2 years ago when I put this project to the side. And this is the problem with putting things to the side, is you don't always remember why you put it to the side, or you don't always remember all of the details, like what the problems were. And what I remembered was that I had this pattern piece that did not include the seam allowances. I had it written on there that I was supposed to cut it an extra 1/2 inch, and I hadn't done it. I had cut out the muslin to the size of the pattern piece. And so I learned all of the techniques for the darts and all of that. And I think I realized, oh no, I forgot to do the seam allowances. But then I thought, well, I have this flannel that I'm going to practice with. So when I do the flannel mock-up, then I will add the seam allowances. So I've had the practice in constructing this and drawing this out. I will add the seam allowances when I do the flannel mock-up. So now it's 2 years later, and I've lost weight. And so the muslin that was too small for me 2 years ago fits me perfectly. But then we added extra width to it to give me the seam allowances. And so it was so huge. And I was just like, oh. So I went into the class, and she's like, the good news is that it's better that it's too big than it's too small. And so she pinned me up and said, I think, this much. And so I reserged the edges. Well, I redid the seams, and they were huge. And so then I trimmed off the seam allowance that I had, some of it by reserging it. They have a serger at the class that you can use. And so then she helped show me how to put this Petersham ribbon that I had that I was going to use for inside the waist for the stability. And then she said, and then for your hem, you're going to do a Hong Kong finish. And I did not know what that was. She kind of described it. She had a vintage dress in the background, a suit from the 60s that she showed me on the inside, like, here's how it works. And so this past week, I just decided I'm going to just do this myself. I had to make myself some bias binding with my lining fabric, which was not easy because I didn't have a lot of extra. And so there were a lot of little pieces. I made my bias tape. I sewed it on. And then, I managed to do the hem, and I think it worked out. I did the finishing details on the Petersham, and the only thing left is the hooks and eyes. I had some hooks and eyes that I was going to put in, and they were so tiny. I thought, this seems wrong. And so I was doing a search on hooks and eyes, and I saw, oh, for a skirt, I should have a bar and this other kind of a hook thing. That the ones that I have, I think they were in my grandma's sewing basket, and they're like for the top of a dress or something like that. So those I will get when I go to the class later this week, and I will do that final sewing. This is the skirt, and I will insert either some video or some photographs of me with the skirt and the sweater on. But for right now, this is the skirt. I'll show you the side seams. Let's see, where is the seam? The seam is right here. You can see that it's not perfect. Pattern matching, but it's pretty good. I think this side might be a little better. It's a little better. And then, where's the back? And then we've got up the back. And then on the inside, I've got the Petersham ribbon in here. It's tacked down to my various darts. And then right here is where I'm going to be doing the hooks and eyes, so that I can close the top of it. So it worked out. I'm pretty happy with it. I accomplished all my goals. I cut the fabric. I did a type of lining. It's not maybe the type of lining that other people would do, but it is a type of lining. I pattern matched. I drafted my own skirt pattern. So I learned quite a few things, and I'm really happy with how things turned out. Oh, let me show you also this hem that I did. So the seam binding, or the bias binding, surrounds the raw edge of the wool fabric, and then I folded that up, and then I sewed that to the lining so that there's no thread showing on this side of it. And my seams are right here. They have some serged edges. I'm, pretty happy. I mean, there's some things in here that are not perfect, and I am completely fine with that because I don't have the skills to be a perfect sewist at this point. I just want to keep improving. So that's my finish at February. I'm really happy with how things went. I set myself some realistic goals for the month and I was able to accomplish all of them. I hope that you were able to set some realistic goals for yourself, and that regardless of whether or not you achieved those goals, that you at least made some progress on your pile of unfinished objects, because that is the entire point of Finish It February. Make some progress, not to be perfect. Well, that's it for this week's Casual Friday. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below, or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.